Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. Can an HOA legally force you to pay for something if you're not a member? I got a bill for a security patrol, and when I pointed out my house was exempt, they sent lawyers after me with a threat to put a lien on my home. So I sent one letter back, just one, that made the entire problem disappear. You're going to want to know what was in it. I want to preface this by saying I am not a dramatic person. I am not someone who picks fights, argues with strangers, or goes looking for conflict. I work in contract management for a mid-sized logistics company, which basically means my entire job is reading the fine print that other people skip, catching problems before they become expensive, and being the calm, boring person in the room who says, "Actually, let me check the agreement before we commit to that." My coworkers joke that I probably read the terms and conditions on shampoo bottles. They are not entirely wrong. It is a habit that has saved my company a lot of money over the years, and as it turns out, it eventually saved me a considerable amount of grief as well. So when I tell you that I spent several months in what I can only describe as a legally stupid standoff with a homeowners association that had absolutely no claim over me whatsoever, I want you to understand that I did not start it, I did not enjoy it, and I definitely did not lose it. Let me back up. About 3 years ago, I bought a house. Not a flashy house, not a brand new build in some master-planned community, but an older home on a good-sized lot in a neighborhood that had clearly been developed around it rather than with it. The house predated most of the surrounding development by a couple of decades. At some point, a developer had come in and built up the subdivision that now surrounded my property on all sides, filling in what used to be open land with matching houses, matching mailboxes, and an extensive list of matching rules governing everything from grass height to what kinds of holiday decorations were considered acceptable. My house sat in the middle of all that like a different era had survived into the present day. The fence was wooden and slightly weathered in a charming way, nothing like the uniform vinyl fencing that ran along the edges of most of the other properties. The garden was full of established trees and plants that had been growing there for years, which meant it looked messy by subdivision standards but was actually thriving, deeply rooted and almost entirely self-sustaining. The front door was a deep green that I had chosen because I liked it, not because it appeared on any approved color list. When I bought the house, my real estate attorney had pointed out something during closing that she described as genuinely rare. The previous owner of the property had been approached by the developer when the subdivision was first being built and had been asked to sign on to the new homeowners association that would govern the surrounding community. This was fairly standard practice for developments that expanded around existing lots. The previous owner had been given the option, considered it, and declined. That refusal had not just been verbal. It had been formalized, documented, and recorded directly into the property deed as a legal covenant. The exclusion was a matter of public record, visible to anyone who pulled the deed from the county clerk's office. My attorney had highlighted this section during the closing walkthrough and told me it was a valuable feature of the property. As long as I owned the home, the HOA had no jurisdiction over it. No rules applied, no fees applied, no authority of any kind transferred from the association to my lot. The house was, legally speaking, its own island in the middle of the subdivision, entirely untouched by whatever the board decided to do, charge, or enforce. I filed that information away, put my closing documents in a labeled folder in my filing cabinet, and moved on with my life. For the better part of 2 years, this was a complete non-issue. The HOA did not contact me. I did not contact them. The neighborhood hummed along with its coordinated landscaping and its scheduled maintenance days, and my slightly wild garden continued to exist in comfortable contrast to all of it, drawing occasional curious glances from passing neighbors, but no formal complaints, because there was no mechanism through which the HOA could formally complain to me about anything at all. Then one afternoon I came home from work and found a letter in my mailbox. It was glossy and professional looking, the kind of thing clearly designed and printed to project legitimacy. Thick paper, a clean logo, formatted with the kind of precision that suggests someone spent real money on the presentation. It was from the subdivision's HOA board, and it announced the launch of what they were calling the Community Safety and Security Patrol Initiative. The letter described a newly contracted private security company that would be conducting around-the-clock patrols throughout the neighborhood, with the stated purpose of protecting residents and maintaining property values throughout the community. Behind the announcement page was a second sheet. An invoice, $85 per month, described in the invoice language as a mandatory community fee. Due immediately. I read it twice, set it on the kitchen counter, and stood there for a moment. My first reaction was not anger. It was not even annoyance, exactly. It was closer to mild confusion paired with a fairly confident assumption that someone had made a clerical error somewhere. A mail merge had gone wrong. An address had been included in a list it should not have been on. Something routine and fixable. I genuinely did not imagine in that first moment that this was going to become a whole thing. Because I am who I am, I did not just set the invoice on a pile and forget about it. I went to my filing cabinet, pulled out my folder of closing documents, found the relevant section of my deed, and confirmed that everything was exactly as I remembered. The exclusion was there, clearly documented, unambiguous. Then I typed a short email to the contact address printed at the bottom of the invoice. I kept it polite and brief. I explained that I believed the invoice had been sent in error, that my property was not a member of the HOA and was legally excluded from the association and its fees, and that I would appreciate it if they could correct their records and remove my address from the billing list. I said thank you at the end because I assumed I was dealing with an administrative mistake and there was no reason to be rude about it. I sent the email and for the next several days thought about it essentially 0 times. I figured that was the end of it. These things happened. Someone would catch the error, update a spreadsheet, and I would never hear from them again. I was wrong about that. A few days later, I got a reply. It was short, it was curt, and it was signed the HOA board in a way that made it clear it had been written by one specific person rather than any kind of committee deliberation. The response said in full that the security patrol benefited all homes within the community boundaries, that as a result all residents were required to contribute, and that the fee was mandatory. That was the entirety of the reply. No acknowledgement of my question about the exclusion. No engagement with the legal point I had raised. Just a flat assertion that I had to pay. I read that response carefully. I read it a second time. This was the moment I understood that the invoice had not been a mistake. Someone had either received my email and dismissed what it said, or had decided that what it said simply did not matter. The assumption on their end appeared to be that if they responded with enough confidence and authority, I would accept the ruling and pay without further argument. I replied a second time, and this time I was considerably more specific. I acknowledged their response, confirmed I had read it, and then restated my position without softening it. My property was legally exempt from the HOA and all associated fees as documented in the recorded deed. I asked them to provide a copy of any signed agreement in which I had consented to join the association and accepted liability for these fees. I told them that if no such document existed, they needed to cease billing me immediately. Then I waited again. They did not reply. About a month after the second email, a new invoice appeared in my mailbox. This one was for $195. $85 for the current month, $85 for the supposedly overdue first month, and a $25 late payment penalty for the delinquent balance. The tone of this invoice was noticeably different from the first. The word delinquent appeared in the account status field. There was language about accounts being flagged for board review. The overall presentation was clearly designed to feel more urgent and more threatening than the first invoice had been. I set it on the counter next to where the first one had been sitting. I decided to call the phone number printed on the invoice and see if I could reach someone willing to have a real conversation. I was transferred twice, put on hold once, and then finally connected to the person who was clearly the driving force behind all of this. The HOA board president had been running the association for several years and had a reputation in the neighborhood that I had picked up on from occasional conversations with my immediate neighbors. She was, by multiple accounts, someone who took the role very seriously, who was known to walk the neighborhood documenting violations, and who had a very specific vision of how the community should look and operate at all times. The phone call did not go the way a productive conversation should go. She was not interested in the legal specifics. Every time I raised the deed exclusion or asked for documentation of any agreement that bound me to the HOA, she either talked over me or redirected the conversation entirely. She told me that the patrol car drove past my house the same as it drove past everyone else's, so I was receiving the benefit of the service whether I chose to acknowledge it or not, and that meant I had a responsibility to contribute. She said the word fairness several times. She said everyone else in the community had managed to understand this situation without any trouble, implying that my inability to accept it was the real problem here. When I asked her directly to name the specific legal mechanism that allowed the HOA to bill a non-member for a service they had not contracted for and had never agreed to receive, she told me I was being difficult and that she did not have time for this kind of conversation. Then she hung up on me. I put my phone down and stood in the kitchen for a minute. I was not furious. I had dealt with enough impossible conversations in professional settings to know that matching someone's energy when they are operating in bad faith only gives them more material to work with. What I felt instead was something quieter and more specific. I recognized that this situation was not going to resolve through reasonable communication, because the person on the other end of these interactions was not engaging with reason. She was engaging with authority, specifically with the assumption that she had it and I did not. I was going to have to demonstrate that this assumption was incorrect. I had seen this type of dynamic before, mostly in professional settings where someone higher up the org chart was used to people folding simply because they were senior. The tactic only worked as long as the other party did not know their own position well enough to hold it. Most people, when confronted with official language and confident assertions from someone presenting themselves as an authority, would doubt themselves. They would wonder if maybe they had missed something, if there was some technicality they did not understand, if fighting it was worth the stress. And so they would pay or comply or go quiet. The board president had spent years in a community where her word was essentially final. She had rules, she had a board, she had a budget, and she had the weight of community expectation behind her. Nobody had apparently pushed back in any meaningful way for long enough that she had come to believe nobody would. Or maybe she had just never encountered someone who had the documentation to match her confidence and the professional background to know exactly what to do with it. Either way, she had picked a genuinely unfortunate person to try this with. A couple of weeks after that phone call, the neighborhood newsletter arrived in my mailbox. I normally set these aside without reading them, but something made me flip through it this time. In the middle of the newsletter, written in a style I recognized immediately as belonging to the board president, was an article about community values and shared responsibility. It described how the security initiative depended on full participation to function effectively, and how a small number of individuals who refused to contribute were undermining the safety of their neighbors and eroding the overall integrity of the program. It talked about the moral obligation that came with living in a community and the selfishness of those who took benefits without paying their share. My name was not in the article, my address was not in it, but given that I was apparently the only person who had disputed the fee, there was no real ambiguity about who had prompted the column. I folded the newsletter and set it on the counter with the invoices. Then, about 2 weeks later, the letter from the law firm arrived. It came in a thick envelope with the firm's name and address in the corner. The letter was formal and structured in the way legal correspondence is when it is designed to feel overwhelming. It identified the firm as counsel for the HOA board, laid out the outstanding balance I allegedly owed, and informed me that if the full amount plus accumulated fees was not received within 30 days, the firm would initiate proceedings to place a lien on my property. A lien on my house, for fees I did not legally owe, to an organization I had never joined, for a service I had never agreed to pay for. I read the letter twice at the kitchen counter. Then I sat down with a cup of coffee and thought it through carefully. In my day job, I worked regularly alongside corporate attorneys. I sat in contract negotiations where the amounts in dispute were in the millions. I had seen legal pressure tactics deployed by professionals, and I understood exactly how they worked. You produce something official-looking, you attach a short deadline to it, and you count on the other party being either uninformed enough or uncomfortable enough to simply comply. The tactic worked a lot of the time, especially when the target lacked the background to evaluate the actual legal strength of what they were looking at. The legal strength of what I was looking at was extremely thin. There was no contract, there was no signed agreement of any kind. There was a recorded deed that explicitly excluded my property from the HOA, and that deed was sitting in the county clerk's public records where anyone could find it in 10 minutes. The law firm had either not bothered to check, or had checked and was betting I had not. Either way, the letter was built on nothing, and I was about to respond in a way that made that fact unmistakably clear to everyone involved. I spent the following weekend being methodical. I went back through every piece of communication from the very beginning, organized everything by date, and built a clean timeline. I noted the specific filing details from my deed, the book number, the page number, the date it had been recorded with the county. I spent several hours reading about HOA law in my state, which confirmed what I already understood. An HOA has no power to levy fees, and certainly no power to place liens, on a property that is not bound by its governing documents. The fact that a security car drove past someone's house without that person's knowledge or consent does not constitute a service that can be retroactively billed to them. I did not call an attorney, at least not yet. I did not need one for what I was planning. What I needed was a very specific kind of letter sent in a very specific way. I drafted it carefully over the course of a Saturday afternoon, revising it several times until every word was exactly right. The tone was professional and direct. No anger, no sarcasm, no emotional language anywhere in it. Just clearly stated facts and clearly stated consequences, organized into a structure that would be immediately legible to the attorneys reading it. I addressed it to 2 recipients. One copy went to the HOA board's official mailing address. A second copy went directly to the law firm because I wanted the attorneys to read this before their client did. I suspected that once the attorneys actually checked the deed records, their advice to the board was going to shift dramatically, and I wanted them to have every opportunity to do that before anyone doubled down further. Both copies were sent via certified mail with return receipt requested. This was important to me. I needed documented proof that the letters had been physically received and signed for at both addresses, because if this situation escalated any further, I wanted a clean record of exactly when both parties had been put on formal notice of everything I was about to say. I drove to the post office myself on a Sunday morning to send them. The letter opened by identifying itself as my formal response to the law firm's demand and stating plainly that I was rejecting the claim in its entirety. It then laid out the factual foundation without embellishment. My property was not, and had never been, a member of the HOA. This was explicitly documented in the property deed recorded with the county. I included the specific filing details so there could be no claim of uncertainty about where to look. I noted that this was public record and had been since before I purchased the property, meaning it was information that had been available to anyone who cared to check at any point during the months this billing dispute had been ongoing. I then addressed the demand directly. I had previously requested in writing on 2 separate occasions that the HOA provide any legally binding document signed by me in which I had consented to join the association and agreed to pay its fees. Both requests had gone unanswered. I stated plainly that the failure to produce this document was not a procedural delay. It was confirmation that no such document existed, which meant there was no legal basis for any of the charges that had been demanded from me. I then notified them formally that their billing attempts, their threatening communications, and now the threat of a property lien, all carried out in the complete absence of any contractual or legal authority over my property, constituted conduct I was putting them on formal notice about. I directed them to cease all billing and all contact related to this matter immediately and permanently. And then came the part I had thought about most carefully. I added a section informing the HOA and their attorneys that my time had value. I was a working professional, and the hours I had spent over recent months reviewing their correspondence, researching applicable law, and preparing formal responses to claims that should never have been made in the first place represented a real cost. I would be invoicing the HOA for 3 hours of my professional time at my standard consulting rate of $200 per hour. An invoice for $600 was enclosed with the letter. I noted clearly that any further communication on this matter, other than a written confirmation that all claims were being withdrawn, would result in additional time being billed accordingly. I signed the letter, made clean copies of everything including the invoice and all prior correspondence, sealed both envelopes and drove to the post office. I handed both certified envelopes to the clerk, paid the fees, took the tracking receipts, and drove home. Then I made breakfast, put the tracking numbers somewhere I could find them, and waited. I will tell you that the act of sending those letters had felt strangely satisfying in itself, separate from whatever was going to happen next. Not because I had done something aggressive, but because I had done something precise. I had converted a months-long pattern of being on the receiving end of other people's assumptions into a single document that laid out every fact clearly and left the other party with a very limited set of options. They could produce the signed agreement, which they could not because it did not exist. They could continue to push, which would now cost them documented billable hours and potentially real legal exposure. Or they could stop. That was the whole thing. I had taken a situation built on bluster and reduced it to a simple choice. I did not know exactly how the attorneys or the board president were going to respond when those letters arrived. I knew what the legal reality was, and I was fairly confident the attorneys would see it clearly once they looked at the actual deed records. But there was still a version of this where someone doubled down, where pride or stubbornness produced another escalating letter instead of a retreat. I was prepared for that scenario too. I had already identified a real estate attorney I could contact if the situation required it. I had the timeline, the documentation, the deed records, and the certified mail receipts. If this went anywhere I could not handle alone, I was not starting from scratch. What I was not prepared for was total silence. The certified mail receipts came back in my mailbox within a few days of sending, both of them, showing that my letters had been received and signed for at both addresses. I filed the receipts carefully with the rest of my documentation and kept waiting. I went to work, I came home, I watered my garden in the evenings. On the nights when I was out late enough to catch it, the private security car made its slow loop through the neighborhood, headlights sweeping across lawns and driveways before disappearing around the corner. I watched it pass my house from the front step, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, with a growing sense that the silence on the other end meant something specific. I thought about the attorneys. I thought about whoever had signed for that envelope at the law firm, whoever had opened it, whoever had read it, and then likely spent about 10 minutes pulling up the county deed records to verify what I had described. I thought about what that conversation between the attorneys and the board president had probably looked like. How a professional legal firm explains to a client that the position they have been pursuing for several months has no foundation, and that the person they have been pressuring not only knows this, but has now formally documented their intent to treat further contact as billable harassment. I hoped, in a mild and non-vindictive way, that it had been a fairly uncomfortable conversation. A week passed, then 10 days, then 2 weeks. No new invoices, no phone calls, no newsletters, nothing from the law firm. Just quiet. Then one morning, a thin envelope appeared in my mailbox. Not the glossy kind. Not the thick, intimidating kind with a law firm's name stamped across the front as if the envelope itself was supposed to do half the work. Just a plain, standard envelope. The kind that felt almost underwhelming after months of increasingly performative correspondence. It was from the law firm. I opened it at the kitchen counter, standing in the same spot where I had opened the original invoice what felt like a very long time ago. The letter inside was short, remarkably short actually, for something that amounted to a complete reversal of everything the HOA and their attorneys had been insisting on for months. It stated that after reviewing the relevant property records, the firm had advised its client to withdraw the claim in full. The account associated with my address had been cleared. The firm considered the matter closed and would not be contacting me further on the subject. That was it. 3 sentences, no apology, no acknowledgement that they had spent months sending billing demands to someone who had never signed a single document binding him to their organization. No admission that threatening a lien against a property they had no authority over was, at best, an extraordinary failure of due diligence. Just a tidy retreat written in the driest language possible, as though the entire thing had simply resolved itself on its own, and not because someone had finally taken 10 minutes to read the public record they should have checked before sending the first threat. There was also, unsurprisingly, no check for the $600 I had invoiced them. I had never seriously expected one. The invoice had not really been about collecting money. It had been about forcing a cost into the conversation. Up to that point, everyone on their side had behaved as though my time was free, as though they could generate paperwork, demands, deadlines, and threats indefinitely, and I would simply absorb the inconvenience because that was easier than pushing back. The invoice was my way of making that assumption a little harder to maintain. Whether or not they ever paid it, the point had landed. I knew that because the letters had stopped. I read the law firm's withdrawal twice, partly out of habit and partly because I wanted to make sure there was no buried qualifier tucked into the wording. There was not. It was clean. Their client was withdrawing the claim. My account was cleared. The matter was closed. I put the letter in the folder with everything else and clipped it on top of the stack so it would be the first thing visible the next time I opened it. Beneath it sat the invoices, the newsletter, printed emails, certified mail receipts, and a copy of the letter I had sent that finally made somebody on the other end decide this was no longer a game worth playing. Then I put the folder back in the filing cabinet and went to work. That evening I came home, made dinner, and somewhere in the middle of chopping vegetables, I realized the whole thing had quietly shifted into the past tense in my mind. It was over. The invoices were not coming back. The law firm was not going to send another letter. Whatever conversation had happened between the attorneys and the board president after my certified letter landed, the practical result was exactly what I had asked for in my very first email months earlier. Leave me alone. I saw the board president a few times over the following weeks. She still drove her white SUV slowly through the neighborhood on her regular rounds, still appeared deeply invested in monitoring lawns, driveways, and whatever else she considered part of her domain. But when she passed my house and I happened to be outside, she looked straight ahead, not in a theatrical way, not with the exaggerated stiffness of someone trying to prove a point, just forward, very focused on the road, in the specific manner of a person who has decided that acknowledging someone would require more energy than pretending they do not exist. I never said anything to her. There was no reason to. The matter was resolved, the documents were filed, and anything beyond that would have been pointless noise. The private security car kept making its nightly loop through the neighborhood. It still rolled past my house the same way it had since this whole mess started, headlights moving across the fence, the garden, and the green front door that had never needed anybody's approval. Nothing about the physical routine of the neighborhood changed. What changed was that the people running it had apparently accepted, however reluctantly, that their authority ended where my property line began. A couple of neighbors asked me, in a casual way, what had happened, mostly because the billing issue had seemed to disappear as suddenly as it had started. I told them the short version. The HOA had tried to charge me for something it had no legal right to charge me for, pushed it too far, got its lawyers involved, and then backed off once the actual deed records entered the conversation. A few of them looked thoughtful in a way that suggested they were mentally reviewing other fees, rules, or requirements they had accepted over the years without really examining them. I told them the same thing I tell people at work when contracts get waved around without being read. Pull the documents and see what they actually say. Beyond that, it was their business, not mine. The $600 invoice remained unpaid, which was fine. I never chased it. It had already done what I needed it to do. From the first glossy invoice to the thin withdrawal letter, the whole thing had dragged across the better part of 5 months. During that time, I paid the HOA exactly $0. The only money I spent was on certified mail and postage, which came to less than $20. Everything else they had cost me, the hours, the attention, the irritation, the administrative nonsense, I had effectively handed back to them in a format they could not comfortably ignore. The patrol car still runs its loop at night. It passes my house the same way it always did, the same way it did when they thought pressure would eventually make me fold, and the same way it will tomorrow. My house still sits where it has always sat, surrounded on all sides by matching mailboxes, approved paint palettes, and carefully measured lawns. My garden is doing well this season, the green front door is still green, and the HOA is still, in every legally meaningful sense, none of my problem. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm based in the UK and often have to travel for work via train to our head office. I typically get public transport to the train station. I live in walking distance to local connections, and just pay the nominal amount for public transport tickets myself. One particular journey, shortly after moving house, I decided to drive to the station and leave the car there. I needed to get back for an appointment when my return train got in and wanted the car there to make it on time. Like a good little employee, I submitted my expenses including the car park receipt, £20, which cost significantly more than the usual public transport ticket. Eagerly awaiting reimbursement, I was disappointed to get an email advising as per travel and expense policy. I was unable to claim driving-related expense without completing a specific driving for work attestation and supplying updated car insurance proving my car was insured, by me at cost to me personally, for driving for work, not commuting, which essentially this was. Fine, I thought. You know what, you keep that £20, but if we're going to force compliance with the travel and expense policy, two can play that game. Suddenly, all the 2-hour, 52-minute trains were inconvenient, and I had to book different slightly longer 3-hour, 4-minute trains, making them, under the travel and expense policy, eligible for first-class travel. Oh, and as my journey time is longer than 3 hours, as per travel and expense policy, I'm now eligible for overnight stays. Which of course mean that I can submit expenses for meals as I'm away from home in a hotel for my evening meal, as per the travel and expense policy. And then of course reasonable travel expenses, as detailed in the travel and expense policy, also cover taxis for unsociable hours. So unfortunately, that 6 a.m. bus ride is now a 6:30 Uber, and that late night 10 p.m. bus ride when I get home is now also a nice, comfortable Uber, costing around £40, or 10 times what I paid myself for public transport tickets. I think I've more than tripled the cost of my having to travel to head office on each trip, purely out of spite over £20 by maliciously complying with the good old, yep, you guessed it, travel and expense policy. The next one is an entitled people story. So this just happened less than an hour ago, and it is both funny and crazy. Context, I'm a 26-year-old woman. The setting is an authentic family Italian restaurant I went out to with my parents to celebrate their wedding anniversary on Saturday night. It's in a small town, but this restaurant is award-winning with divine food busy and the staff are wonderful. My mom also thinks one of the waiters/chefs has a crush on me, lol, said that he has always said hi to her. And when we went to the bathroom near the kitchen where he was working, he smiled at my mom, then started looking behind her for me, but I wasn't looking. We have been to this restaurant a few times to celebrate birthdays and with family a lot, and we've never had a bad meal. My parents have been a few times themselves and the staff like them and even remember how my mom likes her wine. My dad also has a laugh with some of the waiters too. And they staff are always polite and can never do enough for us. Because this place is so busy though, they say to people to turn up in plenty of time, 10 minutes early. Now for the story. We had a table booked at 5:30 p.m. and the waitress told us we had it for 90 minutes until 7 p.m. No worries, plenty of time. It was a busy Saturday too. We enjoyed our meal and drinks, and because it was busy, there were some little delays with them bringing things, including our final special coffees and the last of my wine. While we were finishing, the people, 2 women and 2 men, who were next for our table turned up, later than they should have, and when they did, it was really busy with others waiting for their tables. One of the women, the entitled woman of the story, was instantly glaring at my mom and made comments that they should be there, as in at our table, and was also glaring at another table that was empty behind us. Now, we weren't sure which table was meant for them, but we were finishing our drinks as we had 5 minutes left, and that one from Karen's party even tried to sit at the empty table without the okay from a waiter, but was stopped by her husband and called back to wait. When the waitress came back to tell me and my parents, we got up so they could clear the table and finish our drinks near the bar and near the other people, including Karen. My mom had noticed her, and the other woman glaring, and just looked back at her. My mom is a good woman, but not to be crossed. She also said sorry to the waitress after we weren't sure about the time we were supposed to move and told her we weren't being slow. It was that the bartender was slow with the drinks due to things being busy. She was okay with it and thanked us for moving after we paid. We got our coats and walked with our drinks to finish them. And that is when Karen started. She said in a sarcastic way, "I'm sorry you had to get up and move for us." She was also quite close to my mom and she doesn't do well with that. My mom said, "It's okay, thank you," and turned away to step back closer to the bar to finish her drink. The woman wouldn't leave her alone and kept talking to her loudly, standing close and was nearly touching her despite my mum moving away. My mum then said firmly, "Go away," and the woman gasped like my mum had just slapped her. The other woman did too and started looking around at others to get back up. She called my mum rude and still wouldn't leave my mum alone. My mum then said, "Please leave me alone," as this woman was making a scene and kept calling my mum rude. My mum then said, "Look, I'm sorry if I came across short, but I don't do well with people getting up in my face like this." While this was going on, some people and staff were watching, including the bartender who was looking apologetic at my mom but was busy. And as a former restaurant worker myself, I know that we could have risked getting in trouble or getting something nasty said to him, as well as a young couple sat at a booth near the bar that Karen and the other woman rudely sat at without permission, like this couple's table was for waiting. The woman still wasn't leaving my mom alone, calling her rude, and after mom said it was her anniversary and they were just there to enjoy a meal, the woman sarcastically said happy anniversary, still saying she was a rude woman and not backing off. At the point, the other woman and man backed off, and the other man, I think Karen's husband, looked embarrassed and eventually did when my mum just finally told her to leave her be or she'd be cursed. My mum jokes years ago she'd be burnt for being a witch because she knows about herbal remedies and things, and she walked away. She did gasp over dramatically and called my mum a witch. My mum just walked away from her near the couple in the booth and asked, was she in the wrong? The woman in the booth said no way, that she was awful and up in my mum's face, and told my mum about how Karen rudely sat at their table like it was a waiting room. They said she was awful and sorry that happened, and after we finally finished our drinks, we left. After we got home and got changed, my mom called the restaurant to apologize for what happened, and the nice bartender man down the phone said she had nothing to be sorry for and told us Karen and her party turned up late. The man also said they know we wouldn't be rude since we have been there many times and each time are nice and tip well. He also hoped it didn't ruin my parents' anniversary and would come back again soon. My mum thanked him and ended the call. I and my dad also said she didn't need to apologize, but I understand why and am proud of my mum. She's been through a lot, but she is a good person. So yeah, F rude Karens who expect the world to revolve around them even when they are late and wrong, and be kind to people in hospitality. The next one is an entitled parent story. This happened a few weeks ago and I'm still kind of baffled by the whole thing. I was out for my usual morning ride on a dedicated bike path in our local park. Not a shared pedestrian walkway, an actual marked bike path with little bicycle symbols painted on the ground every 20 meters or so. I ride this route probably 4 times a week, so I know it pretty well. I came around a gentle curve going at a pretty normal pace, maybe 15 miles per hour, and there was a kid, couldn't have been older than 6 or 7, riding a scooter directly toward me, in the middle of the path, facing the wrong direction. I braked pretty hard, swerved slightly to the right, and managed to stop maybe 4 or 5 feet away from him. Kid looked mildly startled for about half a second, and then just kept scooting in a little circle like nothing happened. Before I even had time to catch my breath, this woman came absolutely sprinting from a nearby bench screaming, "He almost hit my son! He almost hit my son!" to nobody in particular. There were maybe 3 other cyclists nearby who all slowed down to watch. She got right up in my face and told me I was riding way too fast for a park, and that I needed to watch where I was going around children. I very calmly pointed out that this was a designated bike path, that her son was riding the wrong direction in the middle of it, and that I had actually managed to stop safely without anyone getting hurt. She then demanded I apologize to her son for scaring him. The kid was at this point approximately 15 feet away, happily running over a stick with his scooter wheels, completely unbothered. I said I was glad nobody got hurt and started to ride away. She yelled after me that I was a menace and that she was going to report me to the park. I have no idea who exactly she planned to report me to or what for, but I hope the park authorities enjoyed that conversation. Anyway, thank you for watching.